The polished marble floors of Stirling Tower gleamed under the midday sun, reflecting the immense wealth that built and maintained this Manhattan edifice. David Miller, a name synonymous with innovation in tech and real estate, surveyed his empire from his 60th floor penthouse. At 48, his silver hair was impeccably styled, his custom suit perfectly tailored, and his gaze, usually sharp with strategic intent, occasionally softened as he glanced at the sprawling city below. Today, however, a faint tremor of impatience rippled beneath his composed exterior. His new cleaning assistant was late, an anomaly in the highly disciplined environment he cultivated. David, a man who built his fortune on efficiency and precision, valued punctuality above almost all else. He preferred order, a stark contrast to the quiet chaos that was about to unfold. He moved from his panoramic window, a testament to his success, towards the minimalistic kitchen, where a half-finished espresso sat cooling. His morning had been a blur of high-stakes calls and market analyses. He was on the cusp of finalizing a monumental acquisition, a deal that would redefine his legacy and cement his position among the titans of industry. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every contingency accounted for. He took pride in this control, the meticulous orchestration of his life and business. He believed in meritocracy, in the idea that hard work and intellect paved the path to success, a path he had certainly traversed with unwavering determination. He had little patience for perceived incompetence or excuses. A soft knock, barely audible against the hum of the city, finally reached his ears. He straightened his tie, a subtle gesture of regaining composure, before moving to the door. Standing there was a woman, perhaps in her late 30s, her frame slender, her shoulders slightly stooped under the weight of a large, well-worn canvas bag slung across her body. Her uniform, a simple dark tunic and trousers, was clean but clearly not new, its fabric thinned by countless washes. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back severely, bore the subtle lines of exhaustion, yet her eyes held a spark of quiet resilience. This was Maria Davis, his new cleaning assistant, replacing old Mr. Henderson, who had finally retired after 3 decades of service. Maria looked up, her expression a mix of apology and quiet deference. "Mr. Miller, I am so sorry I'm late," she began, her voice soft, carrying a trace of an accent David couldn't quite place. "My bus was delayed by an hour, and then there was a problem with the subway connection. I tried to call, but my phone—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to a pocket. David, accustomed to swift, decisive action, cut her off with a polite but firm wave of his hand. "It's quite all right, Maria. Just ensure it doesn't happen again. Time is money, you understand." He gestured vaguely into the vast living area. "You can start in the study. Everything is as Mr. Henderson usually kept it." He turned to walk away, his mind already back on market fluctuations, when a sudden, jarring sound shattered the elegant silence. Maria, startled by his abrupt departure, had shifted her weight, and the strap of her overloaded canvas bag, already frayed from years of heavy use, gave way with a sharp snap. The bag tumbled to the polished floor with a muffled thud, its contents spilling forth like a secret unburdens into the sterile environment. David paused, an unusual sensation prickling at him, a mix of annoyance at the disruption and a flicker of something akin to curiosity. He watched, a silent observer, as Maria gasped, her face flushing crimson with mortification, and quickly knelt to gather her belongings. But before she could scoop everything back into the torn bag, an array of items lay exposed on the pristine marble, forming a stark tableau against the backdrop of opulence. There were a few crumpled dollar bills, maybe $30 in total, far less than one would expect for a day's pay, a worn leather-bound journal, a faded photograph of 2 young children, and a stack of official-looking envelopes. His eyes, trained to absorb and process information rapidly, honed in on the envelopes. They weren't ordinary mail. They were official, government-issued documents and medical statements. A peculiar sense of disquiet settled over David. He was not one to pry, but the sheer vulnerability of the scene, the stark contrast between his world and hers, was undeniable. He noticed the tremor in Maria's hands as she fumbled with the papers. One particular envelope, its corners dog-eared and its flap repeatedly opened and resealed, bore the logo of a prominent New York City children's hospital. It was addressed to Maria Davis. A sudden, unbidden impulse, entirely out of character for him, compelled him to step closer. He rationalized it as an offer of assistance, a simple gesture of politeness. He knelt ostensibly to help her, but his eyes, despite his best efforts, involuntarily scanned the top document in the pile. It was a medical invoice, startlingly high, and beside it, a diagnosis. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, it read, chilling him to the core. Below it, in stark, clinical print, was the patient's name, Lisa Davis, age 9. A knot tightened in David's stomach. Lisa, the little girl in the faded photograph, her smile bright despite the wear of time on the print. He felt a sudden, profound shift within him. The initial annoyance at Maria's tardiness, his preoccupation with his acquisition, all receded. He saw not a cleaning assistant, but a mother, her life irrevocably altered by a devastating illness. The medical bills, stacked haphazardly, amounted to an astronomical sum, a figure that, for someone like Maria, would be insurmountable. He saw the precise figures: initial chemotherapy, ongoing treatments, specialized medications, an escalating mountain of debt that dwarfed the few crumpled bills in her bag. The total cost estimated was well over $420,000, a sum that would be a significant dent even for him, but for Maria, it represented an entire lifetime of impossible struggle. Maria, her face still hot with shame, finally managed to gather most of her belongings, her fingers trembling as she tried to force the bulging papers back into the torn bag. She avoided David's gaze, her silence speaking volumes of her humiliation. I am so sorry, Mr. Miller," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I will clean this up immediately. It won't happen again. I promise I am usually not this careless." She made a move to stand, her gaze fixed on the floor as if avoiding his eyes would somehow erase the accidental revelation. But David didn't move. He remained knelt, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He saw the diploma now, a bachelor's in English literature from a state university, tucked beneath a stack of unpaid utility bills. He saw the carefully typed recommendation letter from a former employer, praising her dedication and intelligence as a high school teacher. A high school teacher, not a cleaning assistant. The layers of her life previously hidden were now laid bare. She was not merely a part of the service staff. She was a woman of intellect, a professional, driven by an unimaginable force to take on work far beneath her qualifications. The contrast between her past and her present, between the quiet dignity of her education and the stark reality of her current struggle, was heartbreaking. He slowly stood, the medical invoice still vivid in his mind. He looked at Maria, truly looked at her for the first time. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was soul-deep. The quiet resilience wasn't just a trait, it was a testament to a mother's fierce, desperate love. He thought of his own life, his immense fortune, his isolated existence in this gilded cage. He had always believed in self-reliance, in the idea that everyone was responsible for their own destiny. But what about when destiny dealt such a cruel, unfair hand? What about when the system itself became an insurmountable obstacle? The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths and the echoes of spilled secrets. Maria finally met his gaze, her eyes wide, a flicker of fear mixed with resignation. She expected anger, perhaps dismissal, certainly a reprimand. What she saw in his eyes, however, was something she hadn't anticipated, a dawning comprehension, a quiet concern that transcended their employer-employee dynamic. He felt an unfamiliar stir of empathy, a connection to a human struggle far removed from the sterile confines of his business dealings. His world, so meticulously ordered, had just collided with hers, a world of desperation and silent sacrifice. He took a deep breath, the decision forming in his mind with the same swiftness he applied to his business acquisitions, but this time fueled by something entirely different. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't simply let this go. The truth, accidentally revealed on his marble floor, demanded an action far beyond a business transaction. David Miller did not immediately fire or chastise Maria. Instead, he simply extended his hand, palm up, toward the stack of medical documents that Maria had finally managed to corral. "The hospital report, please, Maria," he requested, his voice calm, devoid of the annoyance she expected. Maria hesitated, her eyes darting from his tailored sleeve to his face, confusion warring with acute terror. She slowly, reluctantly, placed the wrinkled hospital letter into his hand. David took it, his long fingers carefully smoothing the creases, as his eyes absorbed the clinical details, the grim prognosis, and the essential need for immediate intensive treatment to give Lisa a strong chance at remission. "This amount," he said, gesturing to the staggering figure, $420,000, is for the initial phase, correct? The full protocol. "Yes, Mr. Miller," Maria whispered, finding her voice. It was raw with shame. I know it is an impossible amount. I have 5 other cleaning jobs, and I sell handmade jewelry at a weekend market. I was a high school teacher, but I couldn't keep the job. Too many emergency leaves to take Lisa to appointments. They told me I was unreliable. This is the only work I could get that lets me control my hours to be with my daughter." Her explanation tumbled out in a rush, a desperate plea for understanding. "I never intended for you to know, sir. I don't want charity. I just need time, and I need this job to pay for the small things. The bus fare, the over-the-counter medicine." David looked up from the paper. He didn't see an unreliable worker or a pleading employee. He saw an intelligent, capable woman fighting an impossible battle with fierce, quiet dignity. He thought of his own existence, where the cost of a single piece of artwork in his foyer exceeded Maria's potential earnings over a full decade. The disparity was a physical blow, stripping away his comfortable isolation. He had always dismissed societal issues, focusing on his own sphere of control and success. Now a desperate human face was looking back at him from the precipice of ruin. "Get your coat, Maria," he commanded, folding the report precisely and tucking it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "We're leaving." Maria stared at him, bewildered. "Leaving? But I haven't even finished the living room. Are you firing me?" "No," David said, walking toward his private elevator. "I'm taking you to the hospital. Your job right now is to show me where Lisa is. Call your supervisor at the hospital and tell them to prepare to accept a wire transfer for the full amount." The elevator doors hissed open, but Maria remained frozen. "Mr. Miller, you can't. That's too much money. I can't accept that. I would never be able to repay you. I don't want to owe you my life." David stopped, turning to face her. His expression was stern, yet lacked any trace of coldness. "Maria, I'm not offering you a loan. I am rectifying a grotesque imbalance. You have a skill, an education, and a family. That is not something you should have to sacrifice because of a medical crisis. Let me be clear. I am doing this for the same reason I fund my arts foundation, to put right what I see is wrong. Now, lead the way." The journey from David's pristine tower in Midtown to the specialized pediatric wing of a less glamorous hospital in a different borough felt like crossing 2 separate countries. David sat in the back of his imported sedan, driven by his longtime chauffeur, Michael, who kept glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. Michael had never, in his 22 years of service, seen David take an employee anywhere, let alone show such focused, intense interest in a personal matter. Maria sat ramrod straight on the leather seat, clutching her repaired bag, her silence heavy with disbelief and fear. Upon arriving at the hospital, the stark reality of Maria's life hit David with full force. It wasn't the private, polished facility he typically used. This was a crowded, busy place, smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion, where families sat patiently on worn plastic chairs. Maria led him to the children's oncology ward, where the thin, dividing curtains offered little privacy. Lisa was a 9-year-old girl, frail and pale, asleep in a bed that looked too large for her tiny frame. Her older brother Daniel, 13-year-old boy with dark, worried eyes, sat beside her, gently reading aloud from a tattered adventure novel. When Lisa woke and saw David's imposing figure, she immediately asked in a small, weak voice if he was the reason her mum was sad. "Mama worries about your job," she whispered, her brow furrowed. "Please don't fire her. She's tired, but she's the best." David felt an unexpected wave of emotion crash over him. A child facing mortal illness, worried about his mother's employment status. He knelt beside the bed, a billionaire on a hospital floor. "I won't fire her, Lisa. I think your mother is incredible. And I heard you like books. Daniel says you want to be a librarian." Lisa managed a small, hopeful smile, confirming the detail. David spoke privately with the attending physician, a harried but compassionate woman named Dr. Chen. She confirmed the urgency. Without the next round of specialized chemotherapy, which required a substantial upfront payment, Lisa would likely have only a few weeks. The odds of full remission were high, about 70%, if treatment could start immediately. David, without a word, pulled out his phone and transferred the entire $420,000 necessary for the full protocol, including an upgrade to a private room and experimental drugs. The doctor's shock and relief were palpable. The world seemed to stop as the payment notification arrived, a silent modern-day miracle that promised a second chance at life. As news of David Miller's unprecedented personal involvement with his cleaning assistant spread from the hospital staff to the city's gossip columns and finally to his corporate headquarters, the consequences were swift. His inner circle, led by his aggressive longtime business rival and acting partner, Thomas Rodriguez, was in an uproar. Thomas saw David's actions not as philanthropy, but as a fatal flaw in judgment, a sign of instability. "He's lost his focus, Michael," Thomas railed to David's secretary over the phone, the echoes of the conversation reaching David through his office speakerphone days later. "The market will see this as weakness, an emotional decision. That kind of impulsive behavior costs us credibility, especially with the upcoming acquisition. He needs to distance himself immediately." David's mother, a formidable matriarch of New York society, scheduled an emergency high society lunch. She was polite, but chillingly firm. "David, darling," she said, her voice laced with disappointment, "charity is managed by foundations. It is impersonal, organized, and distant. You do not personally involve yourself with the help. This woman, Maria, is a complication. She is a distraction. People are talking. They say she is a gold digger, using her sick child to trap you. You are risking everything. Your reputation, your business, the respect you've earned." Her words, though cruel in their pragmatism, held a painful grain of truth about the world he inhabited. Maria was already suffering the sting of malicious gossip, and David realized that his act of kindness was inadvertently making her a target. His impulse to help had created a new, complex threat to her already fragile life. 4 weeks into Lisa's intensive chemotherapy, the initial powerful rush of David's action had been replaced by a grinding emotional reality. The city's noise was deafening not only outside his penthouse, but also in the boardroom. Thomas Rodriguez and the acquisition committee had given him an ultimatum: either publicly distance himself from Maria, perhaps through a large impersonal donation to the hospital after Maria was gone, or lose the landmark deal and face a no-confidence vote from his own board. "It's about the optics, David," Thomas had sneered in a confrontational, closed-door meeting. "You can't run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with the emotional judgment of a college intern. Cut the cord." The consequences were already visible. David's stock had dipped, and the rival company was circulating rumors about his midlife crisis. Yet all of that mattered less than the pain he saw in Maria's eyes. They met late one evening in a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop near the hospital, the plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting a world away from David's usual haunts. Maria, her exhaustion more profound than ever, slid a crisp envelope across the table. It contained a letter of resignation, effective immediately, and a carefully itemized, albeit wildly optimistic plan to repay the $420,000. It projected 25 years of payments. "I have to go, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "Daniel came home from school yesterday with bruises. Kids were calling him a beggar's son. They were saying I manipulated you, that Lisa wasn't even sick, that it was a scam. My son is being hurt because of my choices, because of your kindness. I can't let this charity, your kindness, destroy what little dignity and life my children have left." Her words were a stark, painful indictment of his world. David felt a deep, sickening realization. His immense power could solve the medical problem, but it couldn't protect her family from the poisonous judgment of society. He had tried to be a savior, and in doing so, he had exposed them to greater risk. "Maria, you're a victim here. I will hire a lawyer. We will issue a public statement." "And who will believe it?" she interrupted, her eyes suddenly blazing with fierce protective fire. "The society columnists who need a villain? The other mothers who are struggling and need to believe the rich are simply bad? No, Mr. Miller. You live in a world where perception is currency. I live in a world where my neighbors and my children's friends are my entire support system. Your drama is a temporary setback. For me, it is the ruin of my community. Let me go back to my quiet life. I will take any job. I will figure it out. Just please let this end before my children start to hate the help that saved their sister. The emotional force of her appeal, her willingness to walk away from his help and face poverty again to protect her son's social dignity, shattered the last vestiges of David's corporate identity. He looked at her and saw not the janitor nor the debtor, but the person who possessed the true, unyielding strength he had always admired in business, channeled now into pure maternal instinct. The next morning, the long-awaited final meeting with the acquisition committee and Thomas Rodriguez took place. David walked into the boardroom, impeccably dressed, radiating the confidence of a man about to seal a deal. Thomas, expecting David to deliver his carefully worded statement of retraction, gave him a triumphant, anticipating smile. David, however, had spent the night reviewing not only market projections, but also Maria's tattered university diploma and Daniel's bruised face. He looked out at the assembled powerful men, their expressions a mixture of cold calculation and expectation. "Gentlemen," David began, his voice ringing with clarity, "we've spent 4 months negotiating this deal, a deal that would add an estimated $120 million to our portfolio. Yet I must inform you that I am terminating all talks and withdrawing from the acquisition." The room erupted in stunned disbelief. Thomas was the first to speak, his face a mask of furious betrayal. "You what? David, have you lost your mind? Are you going to sacrifice our biggest deal over some fabricated moral crisis involving a janitor?" David held up a hand. "I am sacrificing nothing," he stated firmly. "I am choosing to invest in something I recently discovered holds more value than anything on our balance sheet: integrity. I came to believe that the very structure of wealth that allows a highly educated woman like Maria to scrub my floors while her child faces death is broken. And my pursuit of this deal, my need for your stable optics, was part of that broken structure." He looked directly at Thomas. "You demanded I sever ties to prove my stability. I choose instead to sever ties with the kind of business model that values a stock price over a human life. I choose to be a man who can look a 9-year-old in the eye and know I kept my word." He walked to the window, the glittering city a blur behind him. "You want to know what I've learned? I've learned that I built an empire on efficiency, but lived a life of emptiness. And the woman who showed me that, who faced her reality with more dignity than this entire boardroom combined, is the only stability I need." He turned back to the room, grabbing his briefcase. "I will be funding a new foundation entirely dedicated to providing immediate, unrestricted financial aid to families facing catastrophic medical debt. It will be managed by a woman who understands both numbers and desperation. And no," he added, looking at Thomas's sputtering rage, "I will not be the one running the day-to-day operations of Sterling Holdings any longer. I'm stepping away to focus on the things that actually matter." With that, David walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of a 9-figure deal and the astonished silence of his former empire. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in his life he felt truly right. 4 weeks later, Lisa was discharged from the hospital. Cancer in full remission, her smile bright and infectious. Maria was there, along with Daniel, both filled with relief and profound gratitude. David was also there, having spent those weeks restructuring his life and the nascent foundation. Maria finally met David's gaze, her wall of formality beginning to crumble. "You truly walked away from the acquisition," she said, still staggered by the news the hospital social worker had shared. "You lost so much." "I gained more than I lost," David countered softly. He then presented her not with an offer of re-employment as a janitor, but with a formal contract. The offer to be the executive director of the new foundation, leveraging her accounting degree and, more crucially, her deeply personal understanding of the crisis they were fighting. Maria, overwhelmed, refused the salary, only accepting a modest wage and the promise of a supportive work environment. She accepted the job, but David's next question was the hardest. "What about us, Maria?" he asked, not as her employer, but as a man who had recognized his own loneliness in her struggle. "I respect your boundaries, your dignity, but I haven't stopped thinking about you since you dropped that bag. I want to court you properly. I want to know Daniel and Lisa. I want a future where we face the inevitable complications together." Maria paused, looking from her healthy daughter to the powerful man kneeling gently on one knee to meet Daniel's eye level. She saw his sincerity, his sacrifice. "You're crazy," she whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking through her guarded exterior. "But if you're willing to give up a $120 million deal for me, you might be worth the gossip." Months later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. Lisa's librarian wish was met with shelves of books. Daniel practiced his guitar in the soundproof home theater, and Maria managed a multi-million-dollar foundation from a sunlit office, now employing her expertise for good. David and Maria settled into an unlikely life, finding a deep, quiet love forged in crisis and defined by shared values. The world still talked, but from their perspective, surrounded by the beautiful, messy chaos of a real family, the gossip was just a distant, unimportant hum. David Miller finally had a life more valuable than his net worth. Thank you for staying with David and Maria's powerful story. If you found inspiration in their journey from conflict to connection, we warmly invite you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. We share incredible stories of unexpected second chances and finding true heart where you least expect it. We also invite you to share in the comments which city you are watching our stories from. Did you enjoy David and Maria's journey? What is the biggest lesson you learned from this powerful tale of sacrifice and love?